Hello, everyone. Welcome to another AMA session. And this time we have Mario Jaksetic. He's our head of cryptography here in Rails, Parfin. And the idea today is to have a kind of a conversation. It's kind of unscripted, so anything can happen. I actually prefer it like this. I'll try to corner him, but I'll do my best. It's difficult.
I prefer it like this too, right? It's much more
Yeah,
organic and authentic. Excited for
exactly.
today.
And I'm here in Brazil today. We are having a company workshop. I'm in this hotel, which is in the middle of the jungle, so we don't have no distractions, but we have very good internet, I think. Yeah, it's beautiful. There's like trees everywhere, and I took a picture of a toucan yesterday.
Oh yeah,
It was
yeah,
really
yeah,
cool.
nice.
Yeah, he was in a tree, like he didn't even move, right? He's not even afraid of people. Yeah, and I guess Mario, you are home.
Yeah. I'm in Cayman Islands. We are currently undergoing a cold, a cold week at the low of 19 degrees Celsius. So people here, it's actually pretty funny because like everyone is wearing like their jackets and like this is, I think it's the coldest it's ever been here. But it's not too
Yeah,
bad though, because I still have a little t-shirt
yeah,
on.
it's the same here actually. I think it's the same temperature here in Brazil. I mean, it's good to be outside of London because I live in London and it's super cold. At least when it was when I left. So it's good to be able to open the door and not have to put a coat on. Yeah, so we are just waiting for some more people to join. But maybe we can get started slowly. Maybe Mario, you can just introduce yourself. Just talk a little bit about your background in cryptography. Why do you even like cryptography? I mean, there's a lot of math, right? So explain to people what attracted you into cryptography.
Yeah. So Mario, cryptographer by trade, head of research at Parfin. I studied electrical engineering in college, and I kid you not, I thought I was gonna be a network engineer. So actually doing like planning of computer networks at scale, right? So like hotels, companies, and that type of thing. And literally in the last year of college, I had a class that was called network security. But the professor that was subbing in for that class that year was a cryptographer. So like he had like an actual proper cryptography class. And I became fascinated then. So literally in the last year of my master's, I was like, this is it. I actually like this is what I want to do. And yeah, ended up venturing out into that realm. And that would have been over 8 years ago. And then obviously like the things kind of like go hand in hand, right? So like a cryptocurrency is a currency secured by cryptography, right? So kind of like as the space naturally grew and evolved, I gradually converged to the cryptocurrency blockchain space as well.
And one thing I always kind of admired about you is you really like maths.
Yeah, but it's also interesting because like I wasn't necessarily like the best math student back in school or college, although I did go to a couple of math competitions. But like I like to think of the cryptography math a bit different, and that makes more sense to me. So you're not, that's actually something that people ask me a lot. It's like, oh, do I need to be like super good at math? I mean, obviously it helps, but there's a lot of like sub realms even in the cryptography space where you don't need to be like a math wizard. Or the pun that is used, and it can be cringy or funny depending on you, is you can be a math magician, right? And instead of a mathematician, or not, like you
Yeah.
choose.
I mean, so for people that don't know me, I'm one of the co-founders at Parfin. And, interestingly, I also went to electrical engineering, in university, and also I did physics at the same time. So I also liked maths back then. Nowadays, I don't really use it that much anymore because I went into coding, and maybe when you start cryptography, then maybe you remember some things, but it's not the same. Like it's not the same kind of math, right? That you need to use in engineering. It's kind of a different, sometimes a bit harder, but most of the times is simpler in the amount of things you need to know. Um, I was thinking, given this background of cryptography and so on, just bringing things back a bit into Rails now. Um, can you talk a bit about your views on privacy? Because there's a lot of talk now about first of all, we need to kind of separate the domains here. Now, Rails is an EVM chain, and so for EVM chains, they are account based, right? So it means people have an account that they use the same account to send transactions all the time. It's different from Bitcoin, for example, where you're supposed to kind of never reuse the same account, in fact, or the same address. And so it's always been hard to have privacy in EVM. So can you talk a little bit about why is it hard to have privacy in EVM, and maybe then segue into some possible solutions, like, for example, zero knowledge or anything else that has been used in the past?
Yeah, and it's a pretty loaded question that people don't really kind of like consider seriously enough in terms of how granular and how little details actually matter when it comes to privacy, right? So privacy usually, and let's start kind of like with the base foundational layer is how can we have privacy on chain, right? So like I want to make a private payment from A to B, right? The first problem that is going to appear is that the person needs to pay gas, right? So like to make a transaction, they need to pay gas. So usually you already start at a big disadvantage where even if you do all the math and all the cryptography, right, you still need to pay gas. And then you start going down this rabbit hole like, oh, but you can use like a different wallet. And it's like fair, absolutely. But how do you fund that wallet then? Is it coming from your main wallet? Because if it's coming from your main wallet, then
So
people
so
can
wait.
go,
So you're saying even if we manage to do a private transaction, the fact you have to pay gas kind of ruins it because the gas needs to come from your account.
yeah, exactly. So that's usually like a big like Achilles heel when you're looking at privacy. And it's a very tricky problem to solve. There's different approaches to it, but I'm just highlighting that just to show how you can do everything right. So like then you can have a private payment protocol that works very well. You can do a lot of things there, but just that little Achilles heel there is already like a big problem. Then
Mhm.
you also have if you want to look at another dimension, and then I'm going to tie this all together, right? But if you want to look at another dimension of privacy, imagine you sign a transaction and you click send, and you're using, I'm not going to name names to make it very like agnostic, but you use some type of wallet on your browser, right? So for me, the wallet, that extension, they would be like, oh, funny, this specific transaction comes from an IP in Cayman Islands, right? So all of a sudden, the anonymity set of people that could have actually done that transaction, this is a very good example, is very, very small, right? So
Yeah.
like they know that is some person in Cayman that just made a transaction now at this point in time. And again, everything else can be perfectly done. So imagine you covered all that gas fee, all of that. Now is imagine you fully cover that. Boom! Now you have this situation here where a transaction from someone in Cayman just took place, and this is it's actually like a big issue that is being taken much more seriously now in terms of the whole stack. So this would be like the
But
network layer in terms
let me
of privacy.
understand that. So what you're saying is when you sign a transaction from your browser wallet, that transaction is being broadcast to the network through some kind of RPC node,
RPC,
probably.
exactly.
Yeah. And you're saying that the RPC node is the one that knows the IP, your IP.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So it could leak. So the information of who you are could leak through the owner of the node
Yeah,
that you
the
use
RPC,
to
the
broadcast
RPC
the transaction.
provider. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Okay.
at an edge, all right, and to make it like cleaner, in terms of an example, imagine the RPC provider gets subpoenaed and they need to provide a list of transactions that took place.
Mhm.
They don't necessarily know the exact transaction that took place if it's a private transaction, but they do
Mhm.
know that there's a specific IP address in Cayman that sent a transaction at that specific point in time,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So then that's often a big privacy thing that people don't even kind of like look into very, very deeply.
Mhm.
So you have that. And then you also have, I like to use like the counterparty example, which is you have to be very careful how you query the same RPC, like to see if there's transactions for you, right?
Hmm.
And it's also like, imagine, now let's assume that you did everything well. So you took care of network in the terms of senders, you have everything well done on chain, and then you, Alex, every time you receive a transaction, you send like a little special fingerprint and you're looking just for that one. Then the same counter problem exists, right? So then the RPC provider now knows that this person in this like hotel in the jungle of Brazil has just trying to query for this specific index here, right? So like the stack actually becomes so tricky. It's not as simple as, oh guys, let's just do a private payment protocol on chain and that's done and dusted. Like we're set. And each of these like little verticals, there's so many details that go there as well. Because then once you bring in like quantum and this like store now and decrypt later adversaries, the stuff gets even more peculiar and more complicated. And
And
this,
just in terms of, sorry to interrupt you there, but
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's also important that we explain, the rationale behind having privacy, because people may be thinking, but wait, what about Monero or Zcash, right? I mean, they've existed before, and in fact, some of them even had problems with law enforcement and regulators and so on, because it depends on why you want to provide privacy. What is the use case, right? And I just think it's important that we highlight that in Rails, because of what the mission of Rails is, it's not necessarily that we want to enable individuals to transact with each other with privacy. It's more so that we want to enable institutions to be able to do some of their transactions that they have to have privacy with privacy, but importantly, in a way that doesn't kind of, they don't break any laws or regulations, right? And I think this is yet another layer to what you're describing, because even if you have a solution that provides privacy, there's also the fact that you don't want to just give it away in a way that kind of breaks any law, right? And in
exactly.
Rails, I think it's more, and I'm not saying that Rails is only used by institutions. That's far from it. Like the Rails public chain is really a retail kind of users kind of like a chain, is a public chain. People can come and buy tokens. We have a test net online, and we're going to launch the main net. We're going to make some announcements about the exact date very soon. But it's like a chain for people to use. So how? So I guess the question is in this context, like what's been the your focus in as head of research in like providing privacy for this kind of situation with institutions, but also that we have users on the public chain that may want to interact with it in some way or shape or form.
Yeah. And it's very interesting you say that, because when you look at the requirements from big players, it's very interesting to see kind of like what are the requirements for an institution in terms of privacy, and then what are the requirements for a retail user in terms of privacy. And they're usually much more relaxed on the user side. Like at the end of the day, the
Yeah,
user just wants kind of like the consciousness of, let me send money, whether I'm paying for one coffee, in a way where people don't really know my balance, right? And this is it's kind of like
yeah,
the big scary part when you think as a user. Imagine, I always like to use this example. Imagine you got like a great deal, you got a very cheap apartment that you rented, everyone is happy, but then you pay your landlord, and the landlord looks at your wallet address and sees that you're actually saving up. You have a reasonable sized savings account, which is like your wallet. And they're gonna be like, oh, this guy actually can afford more. I'm gonna jack up the price of his rent,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's an asymmetry that doesn't exist today in the original banking, in the traditional banking system. That doesn't happen today. So if I pay my rent
Hmm.
via wire, the landlord is happy as long as you pay on time, obviously. And but that's the information, like symmetry there. But so why should we evolve the modern financial system but introduce tricky financial asymmetry, right? So like,
Yeah,
if this is an
it needs to be
evolution, it shouldn't
better,
be
right?
worse. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It needs to be better. We cannot be worse than what it is today. So you have, right off the bat, that would be what you were dealing with on the retail side. Obviously, then there's a lot of like tricky things because if you think like anonymity and privacy, which are often concepts that go together, it's usually hiding one amongst many. So like you don't really know which one it is, but you know that it's like some type of one in a group or one in a bigger group. And then there's some caveats there, and then that's how like different privacy approaches exist. So that would be like retail side, and then institutional side, you're looking at the same fundamental requirement exists. Also, like you don't really want to be exposed balance sheets at 24/7, but you do want to give that assurance that everything is okay, that there's not like sketchy things going on in terms of settlements, like the balances are all good, and transactions are efficient as well, right? So, like again, we're talking about evolving the financial system, so we want to make things smooth, secure, and fast.
Faster, smoother, yeah. Mhm.
Exactly, yeah. And so that ends up being like a very interesting thing. And that's where you start introducing these notions of like a spontaneous audit, right? So imagine at the end of the year, uh, you need an additional audit into the books. If you do it properly, from like a mathematical perspective, you can actually open specific transactions, specific quarters, and make and always showcase that everything is adding up, even with these primitives that we're going to talk with zero knowledge and these things. So it's interesting, like you now start seeing like there's like almost like two circles, and there's a lot of overlaps, but there's like some little caveats where some people want one thing, the other people want another, and at the end of the day, you kind of want to make as many people happy with an evolved financial system, right? So like privacy ends up being even more complicated when you take these. We already talked about the technical challenges, but then when you look at these requirements, and then there's also, I think, institutions take very seriously the quantum
Yeah,
problem, right? There's
yeah,
there's an elephant in the room where the approach, it's not like a quantum doomsday or quantum FUD whatsoever, but the approach is much more rational than what's conveyed in social media. The approach is basically there's a risk there, and we should take it into account rather than dismiss it completely. So
yeah,
if we're going to evolve the financial system, and if you think like currencies are supposed to last a long time, it's
yeah,
not something you do for 2 years and then you revisit every 2 years. This is, you're talking like proper financial system, like a sovereign monetary system. So you design something long term. And the moment you think long term, then that little potentially like small risk, a couple of years down the line, that could be a big risk. So
yeah.
it needs to be taken into account very seriously from scratch, right? So this is something I always see. It's a very polarized discussion on socials, but that's the approach there. And I think it's like a very reasonable approach. It's not like they're saying there's a quantum computer here tomorrow, we need to prepare and change everything. No, it's literally a very rational approach where they go, I don't think we should consider the risk to be zero, and if we're trying to design a new type of money to last a couple of decades, we need to look at it as a serious possibility at the end of some
Yeah.
timeline, right?
And okay, so taking that as a segue, now can we kind of start talking a bit about, because we faced all these issues in when
Exactly.
designing Rails, right? And specifically we released this protocol called Enigma, which you led. So can you kind of explain to people, the approach we decided to take with Enigma, and maybe touch a little bit on zero knowledge, and just give like a high level view of what is Enigma, and yeah, just explain how he uses cryptography to provide, privacy in certain ways, that make it actually a good choice for institutions and in general for anyone that wants to use privacy with but staying compliant.
Yeah. Yeah, so Enigma, and very simple, like a single sentence definition. So Enigma is a private payment protocol, like put done like simple, nice and easy, right? But Enigma is actually a suite of protocols because not every payment is the same. right? And I always like to use as an example, say you want to go on eBay or some type of marketplace online. There's usually this little risk that maybe you pay and then they don't send you the item, right? So like then you end up having these type of payments where it would be like a delivery versus payment, and you have very peculiar types of payments, and we'll dive deeper into exactly like those caveats. But I just want to say that not every payment is the same payment, and by default, uh, the math has to change depending on exactly the type of payment you're doing, or can
Hmm.
change. So one of the things we try to do with Enigma as well is to generalize it as much as possible. So then, as we were talking with different institutions, different clients, different entities, we kind of started creating this notion of a checklist of what we needed to have. And then you know this very well because we spent quite some time working on this, and there was a lot of back and forth in a good way, because sometimes we like check marked all of those items, and then the clients were so happy, they were like, "Oh my god, can you now do these two things extra?"
I remember
And
that.
then we would have to go back to the drawing board and be like,
Yeah.
"Okay, how can we now tweak it so that we can be even more complete?"
And it was around the time, so we were designing this as we were working with the Central Bank of Brazil. I remember that because we presented, Enigma a few times, and they would always come back and say, "Oh, this is amazing, but can you also do this
Exactly.
other thing?" And every meeting there was something else.
Yeah, because we just kept pushing the boundaries of what was possible, right? So like
Yeah.
every time we presented something new, they were like, "Oh, we actually didn't think you could achieve this. Is there any way you can also put this one there?" And that was super valuable, and that we learned a lot there, and it was a great experience. So with Enigma, by the way, Enigma is open source. We have it on GitHub. It's literally github.com/Rails network/Enigma. And
Enigma with a Y, right? And people can Google
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
So just
exactly.
Google Rails Enigma, both of them with a Y, and you'll find the
Yeah.
GitHub, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. GitHub is there. So all of this comes from peer-reviewed work, and if you look at kind of like the timeline of that peer-reviewed work, you will see that it matches very well with the work we were doing with the banks. Is we first published a poster at the IEEE Security and Privacy, so it's a very prestigious cryptography conference, and we wanted to put the idea out there, show what we were working on. So we started with a poster there. Then we published at a workshop at Financial Crypto, so financial cryptography being one of the most prestigious cryptography conferences in the world, very focused on the cryptocurrency side of things. So we published that. I think it was last year. Yeah, yeah, because I was presenting last year. So that was version one. We have now published version two, and I'm going to touch on what each kind of like showcases. But version two was now published at. It has the same name, but it's a different conference. It's the Financial Cryptography in Rome, and it's a conference organized by the Central Bank of Italy. So that we have it published there couple months ago. And so we Enigma is like this bundle up of requirements that we got from institutions, and it's a private payment protocol that tackles those things. Now, if you go on our GitHub and if you look at the documentation, you will see that we separate it into two types of payments. So you have an account-based payment system. We call that Enigma payments. That's what we tested out with banks, and that has very interesting properties. But then we also have Enigma DVP. And Enigma DVP is like a UTXO model, and it's funny you were talking about this, Alex, in the beginning. It's almost like a Trojan horse UTXO because it runs on Ethereum, which is like an account-based system, but it does UTXOs inside Ethereum, and there's reasons why it needed to be that way.
I mean, just can you go, like, I don't know if you're planning to do this already, but let's talk a little bit about the technical side of Enigma, like which kind of, so maybe talk a bit about your knowledge and what kind of protocols did you choose to use and why? And because, I think both you and I, we try not to be too technical in these AMAs because we don't want it to become too dense, because then people,
Yeah.
not everyone has a background in cryptography, right? But I think also there are some people that do have a background in cryptography watching this. So can you explain a little bit of some of the choices that were made?
Absolutely. So, and let's start with the whole quantum problem, because then you will see kind of like how it all pans out into the design. So the quantum computing is it's a non-negligible risk when you're looking at it from a perspective of an institution. So you want things to at least be quantum private. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if 20 years from now a quantum computer appears and they look at the first Enigma transaction that took place, they have no clue who was involved in that transaction, right? So that's what I mean by quantum privacy. Is you look at a transcript from the past and you still have no idea what happened. And a lot of privacy protocols existing today already fail that test.
Yeah.
So the starting point for this is, since we wanted some type of, and then usually when you keep balances, private balances on chain, it's usually some type of commitment. So we knew right away that we wanted a commitment that would be quantum private. So we chose the very famous Peterson commitment, and that was the starting point there. So we're like, okay, every balance that goes on chain is a Peterson commitment, and we know that if a quantum computer comes, then they're not going to be able to tell what's the exact amount behind a Peterson commitment. So that was like step one, and then step two was, okay, we have Peterson commitment. What do we use now to make the transfers? So the answer was obvious, and you see this in a lot of payment protocols. It was like, okay, let's do ZK, where you prove in zero knowledge that the transfer is correct. So you send from like one Peterson commitment to the other. And this was like version one, where we achieve confidential payments. And very important note, confidential is you still know who is transacting, but not how much. So the amount is confidential, but you know, like, oh, Mario and Alex are transacting. It can potentially be zero. All right, keep that in mind as well. So it can be like a fake transaction or a dummy transaction, that would be more accurate. But that was the starting point. All right, like, so now we have this type of confidential payment, and this ends up being pretty smooth. It ends up being quantum private. We love Groth 16 as a zero knowledge proving scheme. Groth 16 does have the problem where a quantum computer can forge the proof, right? So we are not completely quantum secure in this flow so far.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I always keep a note of quantum privacy. Like, it's still quantum private, but if a quantum computer appeared today, they could forge that type of transaction. And so that was the starting point. And then I was like, okay, let's now bring anonymity into this. So like, how can we now have it in a way where we don't know who is transacting? So the answer is then anonymity sets. And if you're familiar with like Monero, that would be a very close equivalent in terms of anonymity sets. So like, now what we have is we have a group of participants. And when you make a transfer, you're basically saying, I am one of these, and I'm making a payment. And the thing I like about Enigma as well is that we noticed that uh, the different players had different computers for this. So what we noticed was, if you happen to have a very powerful computer, you can actually have a bigger anonymity set. So you can be like, oh, I'm one of these 50. But if you have like a very like reasonable computer, and just, I always like to point this out because a lot of ZK players use very powerful computers and they hide under these like effectively fake numbers. All of our benchmarks in every on GitHub, on our peer-reviewed papers, everything, they come from a Mac Mini from 2021. All right, so we took this very reasonable approach where like it just happened to be the computer like we were sharing in the research team. We're like, okay, let's see how our system does in this pretty commoditized hardware. Like, if you're even following the updates this week, a lot of people bought the latest Mac Mini to run the
Cloudbot, yeah.
Cloudbot, and yeah,
Yeah.
and that's how commoditized it is. Right? Like, people were just
Mm-hmm.
for fun buying that specific like cheap computer, and that one is much better than the one we use because ours is like 5 years old now. And so we took that approach, like very reasonable, grounded, like, okay, with reasonable hardware, what can you do? And there, the approach is you just have a smaller anonymity set, so on par with Monero, and the transactions are super fast. Like they're sub-second. The creation of the transactions, they're less than a second on that computer.
Yeah.
So we had that, all right. And remember what I was telling, like all the caveats here that you have to deal with. So we now have a fast private payment protocol. Nothing goes on chain, but then you had an issue, which was we are now sending to someone, but we need to make sure that someone knows that they're receiving money, right? So how can we have it such that you, Alex, you happen to be receiving money? How can you know that there's money for you on chain, right? And that's often called a private messaging tag. That's the term I like to use. There may be a couple of others in the space, but that's I think it's the most accurate. It's like how can I have a tag there to allow the recipient to see it? And there is a couple of ways to do it, but remember we need to be quantum private, right? So that already restricts the type of things we can do. So then what we do is we actually have a hash based private messaging tag, and when we query the transactions that took place, you, Alex, you actually download a bundle of transactions rather than just one to not give away which one you are downloading, right? Because otherwise this would be a big issue, right? Otherwise you would go on your wallet online and you'd be like, no, 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 I just want this one here. And they'd be like, okay, gotcha. So you in Brazil just received, you are involved in this one here, right? So we even have that type of privacy against the RPCs, like that leakage on the RPCs. And I always say this, and this is one of the reasons why I love Enigma, is that every single decision in the Enigma protocol is there for a reason. You may think like, oh, this is weird. Why do they do it this way? And we try to give as much detail as possible because we're big advocates of transparency and open core principles. Is the entire protocol is described there, and we try to justify every single design decision. So why do you use Peterson commitments? We wanted quantum privacy. Why do you use hash-based messaging tags? Because we know we can use it long-term against everything. And then we have, since while we're at it, we can now go into like the notions of a spend key and a view key, right? So like maybe to make payments, you just need a spend key. So like that's done. You can just spend your money and you're good to go. But what happens if you need to open a specific transaction to an auditor, right? So like you're a big institution, you're moving a lot of volume. What if an auditor needs to see like one specific transaction, right?
And the auditor could be like a government or a regulator,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like law
Any type,
enforcement. Yeah.
exactly. It could be law enforcement. It could be like the equivalent of an SEC. It could be the equivalent of even like a central bank, maybe. So like maybe you're a
Yeah.
commercial bank and you just need to disclose some type of transaction to the central bank. That's the auditor here is very generic, right? And it can even be an NPC as well. So it can be like
Yeah.
a consortium of different entities
Yeah.
to have it more constrained in that environment. So now you have this issue. Okay, how can we open transactions without letting the auditor spend money, right? So like we cannot give them the spend key. Otherwise something happens and they can just go and spend your money, right? So like this was, and you will remember this very well. This was like, I think this was the most pressing question at all times. It was like, can the auditor spend though? Like it was like this was like the one thing. It was like,
I
wait,
remember that. Yeah.
we open to the auditor, but what can the auditor do? Because it's not like we can give them spending keys. And it was like, no, no, no. And this is exactly why we have the notion of a spend key and a view key. And so, and I want to make this very clear because and I even have it very clear in the documentation is the spend key is kept only by the owner, and it allows you to spend money. You don't do anything else with that. That's it, done. It's
Yeah.
yours. It's the definition of your keys, your crypto. It's you. And then we have the view key. And with the view key, things actually get very, very interesting. So we have quantum-based view key. So we use what's called the MLKM, right? So the lattice-based key encapsulation mechanism. If you're deep into that realm, and so we have what we call like the global view key. So like this, from here, you can open every single transaction that would be involving one entity. Ideally, that's kept for you. So like you have the flexibility to then selectively open things. And then we also have ephemeral keys per block. And this is a property I love a lot. And imagine for some reason the auditor goes, listen, just quick sanity check. Can you just open block 23? I just need 23. I don't need anything before or anything after. Like there's something going on. Can you just show me 23? And we actually have a way of showing just 23 without exposing anything that happened before or after, right? So it's very elegant, very clean, and you can prove that it's the correct key as well. It's very, very cheap, cryptographically speaking. It's you literally just
And
selectively disclose one key and you go, auditor, this is the key to open 23.
okay, so let me summarize what I think you've been talking about so far. So we have a protocol called Enigma. It uses zero knowledge to provide privacy and anonymity. It allows for a auditor to check transactions either one by one or globally.
Or
Um,
globally.
and it's open source. It's available in GitHub. It's been there for, I guess, a couple months now,
Couple months
or
now,
maybe even
yeah.
more, right? And people are free to come and take a look at it and use it. Again, it's Rails network slash
Slash Enigma
Enigma.
with a Y. Yeah.
Yeah, with a Y. And just in terms of like what's next for Enigma, because we have that in GitHub. It's been tested. We're happy with it. It's been audited and so on. So what's next? Are you guys working on anything else for Enigma for the
Yeah.
near future?
So we have a couple of things going on now, and these are super exciting developments. So we are now in the process of publishing the DVP component, right? So like that different type of payment. That works a bit differently. Like the commitments are now hashes; they're not really Peterson commitments. The transactions are atomic, but they're atomic over like series of blocks. So stuff gets very interesting there. So we're in the process of publishing that. We're also benchmarking post-quantum ZK schemes to have Enigma fully quantum secure. All right. So like if you look at Enigma, the one thing missing to make Enigma completely quantum secure, it's just the use of this post-quantum ZK. We're already benchmarking that with different schemes out there. And honestly, transitioning into full quantum security is literally just changing that module.
Hmm.
Everything else in the stack is already quantum secure. The spend key is a hash based key. The view key is lattice based. The commitments are quantum hiding, so they're quantum private. The messaging tags are hash based. So like everything that we use, and this explains a lot of design decisions, everything is quantum secure, except for the ZK proof, which we use Groth 16. It's still quantum private, right? And this, I always want to point
Yeah.
this out. So it's still private against a quantum computer, but it's not completely quantum secure. And we're now benchmarking to see kind of like what are the different trade-offs. And there's always any engineer listening to this will relate, right? So like any decision, it's a trade-off decision.
Yeah.
So here it's going to be what's the prover time, verifier time, proof size. It's always going to be a little trade-off. We're now looking at the different tools out there and already starting to measure these different trade-offs. That I think
Okay.
was going to be pretty exciting because it's kind of like a big bundle of complete quantum privacy on EVM, right? I think
Yeah,
that's a
it is
very
quite exciting
exciting.
because that we need to be, like you say, I know there's a lot of work happening now to make sure things are prepared for quantum computers,
Exactly.
right? And the fact we've been doing this all along, I think it's very important. And there's a few questions, people asking about whether Enigma is going to be made available to, is going to be able to work with the, Rails public chain. So the Rails public chain, as people may or may not know, I don't think we are announced a specific date for the launch yet. What's happening internally is we have it in testnet. We're doing lots of, we're starting the auditing process now with an external firm, to make sure that everything is as good as it can be for the public chain, public launch. But there's a few exciting things about it. I'm not gonna, say everything now because Tom, our CMO, is gonna kill me. But one of the things that the public chain of Rails has as a property is that it has sub-second block times, right? And so, is this a problem for Enigma? Can Enigma work when the block times are sub-second?
Yeah. And this is why I also mentioned not every payment is the same payment, right? Like you can have a very fast payment or a very slow payment on EVM. And here so Enigma is compatible with the public chain. And I think one of the things I like the most about Enigma is I always say it's almost like Lego blocks, right? You can kind of like rearrange it and it works for different settings. So you go, I have a very slow chain, and we go, it's okay, we rearrange this. I have a very fast chain, and we go, it's okay, we rearrange this way. And there's a couple of ways to go about it, and I'm happy to spill the beans here in the AMA. And one is what we can have is the tallying process. So like Enigma payments normal rolls over in a per block basis. So a 5-second block right now, roughly speaking, is processed, and the transactions are just tallied consecutively, like very very rollover, like naturally with the chain. Approach number one that you can have is you can just tally over like a smaller window of time. So for example, if you have a sub-second finality, you can just roll over every 15.5 blocks, which is very reasonable for the end user. All right. So like at the end of the day, and the end user, there's only so many granularity you have, right? So like if a transaction takes half a second or 0.3 or 0.7, for the user, that's really indistinguishable, right? Even though in compute time, that's like X, there's like a multiplier parameter there. So what we have is this very elegant trade of user experience. So we just have to we just want to make sure that you don't have to wait for your money to go to you, right? So like if it takes say like 3 seconds, that should be fine because you just receive the money, and like a lot of blocks already happen in that time, right? So that's approach number one. That works pretty well. But approach number two as well that we have is you can leverage that DVP, like the Enigma DVP that is more UTXO based. We can leverage that, all of those data structures and that payment protocol effectively. And we can also run normal payments there. So now it's actually, we're trying to find what's the best trade-offs. We also have it in a way where I think you as the user, if you're very specific, you can also choose what works best for you, right? So if you're a developer building a dApp, and if you need to worry about constant tallying, then maybe take like the account-based approach, and then
Yeah.
your logic does that. But if for some reason you want something more like stale in terms of querying the points, and there's nothing bad with that. It's literally a use case basis. If you want something more neutral in terms of always going and looking at the chain and what's going on, that UTXO approach is probably more elegant for you because there's a lot of
Yeah.
data insertion that the chain takes care of that, right?
But I mean, so the bottom line is it is compatible with
With a
the Rails
public
public
chain.
chain. There's
Exactly.
a couple of design decisions, but that's what your team is working on right now. Of course, again, we're not planning to allow people to send money to one another in a private way to like, obscure, like we don't want, criminals using Rails. It's more so that we want to provide people and financial institutions with privacy when it is actually required to protect, the interest of the people using it, or even sometimes it's even regulatory required, right? that you protect, for example, a bank cannot disclose, your balance to third parties, right? This is like
Yeah.
a requirement, and so this is the kind of angle we're taking. Cool. And so, anything else you wanted to say about Enigma? I think we're going to coming to the end of the session now.
No, not yet. I'll make Tom happy, our CMO, and I'll save a couple of newer release functionalities for keep an eye out for the Easter eggs, especially as we're coming closer to Easter as well. So we'll be aligned with that as well. We have a couple of fun things coming, especially, and I'll spoil the functionality on making Enigma more mobile friendly, so you'll be able to make private payments from your phone,
Oh, that's cool.
which is a big issue today, right? Because like ZK is very expensive and usually only allowed on proper computers rather than phones.
Cool. Okay, and from my side, I guess, I was happy that we could have this conversation. A lot of the times we have this conversation internally in the company, but it's good to be able to have it, publicly,
Exactly.
so people can kind of see, the kind of things we're working on. And again, there's a lot of exciting things to come. We're going to make some announcement about the Rails public chain. There's a lot of work happening. We have finalized 2 new consensus algorithms. That is why, I was saying we have sub-second finality with Rails, which I think is quite cool. There's a few other things that are quite unique to Rails as well. But I think also it's not just about technology. I mean, of course, this AMA is more about technology, but also we have been working on the application layer as well, right? Because in the end of the day, we can launch the most amazing, fastest sub-second, chain ever. But if there's nothing to do with it, then people are going to use it. So
Exactly.
yeah, nowadays we have to kind of make sure that we have ticked all the boxes, not just the technology one. So yeah, watch the space. Thanks for your time, Mario. It was a pleasure. And if anyone has more questions, please reach out to us in X or Discord. Go to our website, and like I say, there's going to be some exciting news coming very soon.
Yeah, I always say feel free to DM me on X, and I do my best to respond to everyone. So